You ever hear a voice so powerful it makes you stop mid-breath, and then wonder how a world like ours could let something that precious die so young? That is the story of Tammi Terrell. Before Motown dressed her in glamour, before Ain't No Mountain High Enough became the national heartbeat, Tammi was a girl carrying wounds no spotlight could hide. A child who learned pain before she learned fame. A teenager who sang like heaven but lived through things that would break grown men. A woman whose smile lit up every stage, even as her body was quietly losing a war no one knew she was fighting. People talk about legends as if they are built. Tammi wasn't built. She was born lightning quick, dangerous, unforgettable. She joked, she flirted, she danced through every room like time itself was chasing her. And maybe it was. Because while the world saw a rising star, Tammi was collapsing behind the curtain, migraines, bruises, secrets, surgeries. While the audience applauded the chemistry between her and Marvin Gaye, no one knew she was singing through a pain that felt like a nail being driven into her skull. This isn't just a music story. It's a warning, a heartbreak, and a truth we rarely tell about the cost of brilliance. Long before the world knew her as Tammi Terrell, she was Thomasina Montgomery, a bright, stubborn, breathtakingly gifted little girl born in Philadelphia on the 29th of April, 1945. Her childhood was stitched together with contradictions, warmth and discipline, promise and pain, laughter and shadows that would follow her all the way into adulthood. Her parents came from the Carolinas, proud Southerners who carried the scars and lessons of a life they refused to pass down to their daughters. Her father, Thomas Montgomery, had clawed his way out of the fields, educated himself, and built a respected life in Philadelphia. He owned a barbershop, managed boxers, ran a Masonic lodge, and became a kind of anchor in the community. He loved Tammi fiercely. She was his shadow, his pride, the child he carried everywhere. Her mother, Jenny, was just as extraordinary. A college-educated actress and poet, she brought art, imagination, and ambition into the house. When she wasn't battling the storms inside her mind, she poured everything she had into her daughters. Jenny suffered from severe clinical depression, and that darkness often pulled her into hospitals for long stretches. When she was gone, Tammi and her younger sister Ludi were cared for by Aunt Alice, the quiet strength behind the family. But even in a home marked by instability, Tammi's light was impossible to ignore. She was energetic, mischievous, always cracking jokes, always moving faster than the adults around her could manage. She was the kind of child who seemed too alive for the world to hold. Her first dream was to become a doctor. Her first love, though, was music. As a child, she took piano lessons, ballet classes, and tap dancing. She sang solos in church and stunned adults with a rare gift she could hear a song once and play it back by ear. Her musical heroes were Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington, and Dorothy Dandridge, women whose power she studied long before she understood her own. But shadows were already gathering. Tammi inherited her mother's intense migraines, and even as a child, a blue vein beneath her eye would pulse visibly when the pain struck. Sometimes it forced her to stay home from school, curled up in silence. Then, at age 11, her life changed forever. On her way home from the Boys and Girls Club, Tammi was attacked, raped, and beaten by 3 older boys. She walked to the police station alone and gave their descriptions. They were eventually caught, but the damage lived inside her. The nightmares came first. Sleepwalking. Silence. A once joyful child suddenly withdrew from the world. Months later, she swung in the opposite direction. She became rebellious, wild, unpredictable. She began smoking, drinking, sneaking out, dressing older than her age. Trauma had pushed her into adulthood far too quickly. By 13, she looked like a grown woman, earning the neighborhood nickname Woman Child. Her beauty, her voice, and her presence drew attention everywhere she went. She became friends with Lola Falana, another rising Philadelphia talent, and surrounded herself with girls just as stylish and confident. Inspired by the film Tammi and the Bachelor, She changed her name from Tommy to Tammi, a small shift that marked the beginning of the identity the world would one day know. She entered talent shows, won every one of them, and soon caught the attention of Luther Dixon, the famed songwriter and producer. At just 14, she signed with Scepter, divided by Wand Records, singing demos for the Shirelles and recording her own first single, If You See Bill. She was still a child, still in school, still living inside a body that hurt. But her star was already rising. By the mid-1960 seconds, Tammi Terrell had already lived more life than most adults twice her age. She'd survived pain, hardship, and heartbreak, but none of it dimmed her spark. When she walked into Motown at just 20 years old, she wasn't some wide-eyed newcomer. She was seasoned. She was confident. And most importantly, she knew exactly who she wanted to become. Berry Gordy saw it almost immediately. Motown was full of stars, but Tammi had something different, an electricity that came from both talent and life experience. She could command a stage as easily as she could light up a room. She had a laugh you remembered, a presence you felt before she ever sang a note. And when she did sing, her voice carried warmth, ache, and joy all at once. Gospel roots, jazz influence, pop sensibility, Tammi held all of it inside her. Her first Motown singles earned attention, but everything changed the moment Berry Gordy paired her with Marvin Gaye. At that time, Marvin was already a respected artist at Motown, but he was yearning for something deeper, something that tugged at the heart, not just the charts. Tammi became that missing piece. From the first rehearsal, people in the studio felt something happened between them. Not romance, not infatuation, something more spiritual. Two voices that didn't just blend, but belonged to each other. Their first duet, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, was a revelation. It wasn't just a love song, it was a declaration of devotion, hope, and perseverance. In the studio, they recorded most of their vocals live together, standing only a few feet apart. Tammi would smile at Marvin after hitting a line. Marvin would answer with a little laugh or a nod, and the moment would lock into the microphone. What they created wasn't technical perfection. It was emotional perfection. The song soared on the charts, but its true power came from the chemistry people felt through the speakers. Fans didn't just love Tammi and Marvin, they believed in them. Their follow-up hits, Your Precious Love, If This World Were Mine, If I Could Build My Whole World Around You, only deepened that connection. People described their performances as magnetic, effortless, soul-binding. On stage, Tammi moved with elegance and quiet fire, and Marvin followed her energy like a dance partner who had waited his whole life for that rhythm. Behind the scenes, Tammi had become one of the most beloved personalities at Motown. Everyone from the Supremes to Stevie Wonder to the Temptations spoke about her kindness, her humor, her ability to make people feel at home. She was young, yes, but she carried herself like someone who had crossed mountains that most people never see. Motown groomed her for superstardom, and she embraced it with grace. She refined her stagecraft, worked tirelessly in the studio, and dreamed of not only dominating the charts, but stepping into Hollywood as an actress. She had the charisma, the skill, and the face the camera loved. Tammi's career didn't just rise, it glowed. She wasn't in Marvin Gaye's shadow, she was his equal. Their partnership wasn't a pairing, it was a phenomenon. But even during this golden period, the shadow of her worsening headaches lingered in the background. Tammi pushed through pain that would have stopped others, not out of pride, but because she loved the stage. She loved the music, and she loved the bond she shared with Marvin, a bond built not on romance, but on artistic destiny. In these short, shining years, Tammi Terrell became more than a singer. She became a symbol of resilience, of talent, of a woman who carried both joy and suffering with courage. This was her peak era, the moment the world finally saw what she had always known as a little girl. She was born to be a star. No one at Motown could have predicted how suddenly Tammi Terrell's life would change. At the height of her success, glowing under stage lights, adored by audiences, and bonded musically with Marvin Gaye, the world believed she was invincible. Her smile was radiant, her voice confident, her future wide open. But behind that brilliance, Something silent and devastating had already begun. Tammi had battled headaches since childhood, but during her touring years with Marvin, the pain grew sharper, more persistent. She carried aspirin everywhere, slipping pills quietly before shows, hiding her discomfort behind bright eyes and careful grace. She didn't want to concern anyone. She didn't want to interrupt the momentum she had worked so hard to build. And she certainly didn't want to let Marvin down, not when their partnership was becoming one of the most beloved duos in music. But on the 14th of October 1967, the secret could no longer be contained. That night, at a college homecoming performance in Farmville, Virginia, Tammi walked onto the stage in her usual poised fashion. The crowd adored her. Marvin stood beside her, ready to begin Your Precious Love, and for a moment, everything felt normal. But as the music swelled, Tammi's body reached its limit. Her vision blurred. The lights became too bright. The pain in her head surged like a bolt of lightning. Then she collapsed, falling directly into Marvin's arms. The audience gasped, but Marvin didn't hesitate. He dropped the microphone and held her close, calling her name, trying to keep her conscious. For him, that moment never stopped echoing. He later said he felt something inside himself break when he saw her fall. And yet, incredibly, the promoter wanted her to return to the stage. Marvin refused. He insisted the tour be paused, that she get medical attention immediately. When Tammi reached the hospital, doctors still couldn't determine the source of her symptoms. Exhaustion, they said. Stress, perhaps. Nothing more. But Tammi's condition worsened. She passed out again in Chicago. Her right side began to weaken. Her balance became unsteady. Her smile, though she tried to hide it, grew strained. The turning point arrived not at a concert hall or a Motown office, but in something as ordinary as a dental visit. Tammi went in for a toothache, and the dentist, noticing her symptoms and facial swelling, urged her family to see a neurologist. That advice changed everything. Tests revealed a brain tumor on the right side, about the size of an acorn. Tammi underwent surgery, the first of many. At only 22 years old, she was suddenly fighting for her life. But even then, her spirit didn't fade. When she recovered enough to return to Motown, she walked into the studio with the same spark that had carried her since childhood. Sometimes she needed help standing. Sometimes she needed to rest between takes. But the moment the red light turned on, she delivered vocals full of soul and tenderness. That's what made the turning point so heartbreaking. The strength she showed, even while her body failed her. As her tumor continued to grow back, surgery after surgery became part of her reality. Her energy faded. Her once bright eyes grew tired. But she still tried to record, tried to rehearse, tried to be the Tammi the world loved. Marvin Gaye watched her decline with a pain he carried for the rest of his life. Her illness didn't just mark the turning point of her career, it reshaped his own soul, his purpose, his music. This was the moment the world began to lose Tammi Terrell, even as she fought desperately to stay. As the 1,960 seconds drew to a close, Tammi Terrell's world became smaller, quieter, and far more fragile. Her bright stage lights were replaced with hospital ceilings, and the roar of adoring crowds faded into the soft hum of medical machines. Yet, even in pain, Tammi remained unmistakably herself, warm, gracious, and deeply determined to keep living, even as her body made that battle harder with each passing month. After her first brain surgery, she tried to return to the studio and the road, but her strength never fully recovered. The headaches returned sharper than before, followed by worsening vision and difficulty walking. Those who visited her during this period said her spirit stayed strong, though her smile became quieter. The girl who once danced through rehearsal halls now moved only with support, and the woman who had been full of laughter now spent nights in silence, gathering whatever strength she had left. Yet through it all, Motown continued to stand by her. Berry Gordy covered her medical expenses, and the Motown family tried to surround her with comfort. Marvin Gaye visited often. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat quietly. But always, Marvin held her hand, as if holding on to the person who had changed his life in ways he could never express. Her final album with Marvin, Easy, was completed during this difficult period. Whenever Tammi was too sick to record, Valerie Simpson filled in for guide vocals, though she later made clear that Tammi still performed most of her own parts. And when Tammi could sing, even from a wheelchair or with limited strength, her voice retained its light, soft but steady, fragile but full of soul. By late 1969, her health declined rapidly. Multiple surgeries left her weakened, nearly blind, and confined to a wheelchair. She weighed under 100 pounds, yet she still held on to hope. She became engaged to Dr. Ernest Garrett, a physician who cared for her during treatment, and her family believed she found comfort in that companionship. In her final public appearance at the Apollo Theatre, she watched Marvin perform from her seat in the audience. When he realized she was there, he came down from the stage, took her hand, and the two began singing, "You're All I Need to Get By." It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. It was simply two souls reconnecting one last time. The audience rose to their feet in overwhelming emotion. In that moment, the world saw not just artists, they saw two people who loved each other in a pure, almost spiritual way. But the moment didn't last. Not long after, Tammi underwent her 8th and final brain surgery. This time, she didn't wake up. She slipped into a coma, and on the 16th of March 1970, at only 24 years old, Tammi Terrell passed away. Her death shook Motown to its core. Marvin Gaye was devastated. He struggled with grief for years, and Tammi's passing became one of the emotional foundations for his masterpiece, What's Going On. Her family mourned deeply, especially her younger sister, Ludi, who had to be carried out of the funeral in tears. Even in death, Tammi's dignity was tested, personal belongings taken from the hospital, disputes over her estate, and unanswered questions that lingered for decades. But none of that diminished who she truly was. Tammi Terrell left behind a legacy far greater than her short life. Her voice, bright, tender, unmistakably vulnerable, became a timeless symbol of love and resilience. Her duets with Marvin Gaye remain some of the most cherished songs in American music history. And her story continues to touch hearts because it is a reminder of how much beauty a person can bring into the world, even in a brief time. Tammi lived only 24 years, but she loved, she fought, she created, and she inspired. And through every note she left behind, she still lives. Some stories don't end with closure. Some stories simply fade into a quiet room, a soft breath, and the memory of a voice that once lifted an entire generation. Tammi Terrell's story is one of those unfinished in life, but complete in spirit. She didn't live long enough to see how deeply the world would come to love her, yet her legacy rests in places where applause cannot reach, in the trembling honesty of her voice, in the courage she showed through pain, and in the quiet dignity she held until the very end. When you listen to her today, those first notes of "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" or the trembling sweetness of "Your Precious Love," you can still feel the warmth of a young woman who sang from a place deeper than talent. She sang from survival, from tenderness, from truth. She carried childhood trauma, heartbreak, and unbearable physical pain, yet she met the world with grace, humor, and a spirit that refused to surrender. Tammi didn't need to live to be a legend. She became one anyway. For anyone who has ever stood alone, anyone who has fought battles they kept hidden behind a smile, Tammi's story whispers, "We see you." Her life reminds us that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it is a small woman from Philadelphia who sings through headaches that felt like nails in her skull, who steps on stage even when her legs can barely carry her, who pours love into every lyric even while her own heart is breaking. And perhaps that is why she endures. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Today, Tammi's music continues to bridge generations. Older listeners remember where they were the first time her voice filled a kitchen radio. Younger listeners discover her like a secret, like a voice too pure to belong to this world. And across time, her duets with Marvin Gaye remain testimonies of a rare connection, a harmony of souls that no tragedy can erase. Tammi's story doesn't ask for pity. It asks for tenderness, for remembrance, for the kind of listening that goes beyond the ear and settles into the heart. So when her voice returns on a late-night drive, on an old vinyl, or in the quiet space of memory, let it remind you of this simple truth. Some lives are short. Some lights burn fast. But some spirits, like Tammi Terrell's, never fade. Rest in peace, Tammi. Your voice lives where mountains cannot rise, where distance cannot keep us apart.